Thank you, Lieutenant Washburn. I'm Minister Virginia Gross Roberts from Emmanuel Baptist Church and from the beloved community. Now we'd like to ask you 3 questions that we also discussed in a smaller beloved community meeting with you and the Police Officers Association leaders that Reverend Nancy mentioned earlier. Lieutenant Washburn will ask you to offer the responses. First, Walter.
Greetings. My name is Walter Hudson. I'm a member of the board of PACT and a member of First Christian Church San Jose. How will the video files from these body-worn cameras be protected? How will we know if someone has tried to tamper with these files or to view them without permission?
Thank you for your question. Security is very important to us, especially when we're talking about video evidence. And I can assure you that we are procuring a system where these concerns will be addressed automatically. That's the short answer, but I'm going to explain it in greater detail so you have a better understanding. We wrote our proposal such that the system will automatically have a built-in audit trail, meaning that if a camera is accidentally dropped on the ground, anybody that picks that camera up is not going to be able to pull that footage and view it, nor delete it, to include police officers. There is an audit trail from the camera up to the cloud. Lots of security measures in place to ensure that it's not tampered with, deleted, or altered. In addition to that, should a file be deleted because of a normal retention schedule down the road, let's say it wasn't used for any type of criminal, administrative, or civil proceeding, once it's deleted, that audit trail continues to exist. That can be printed, and that audit trail will not only tell us who accessed the file, when they accessed the file, how many times they accessed the file, what did they do with it? Did they download it? Did they share it? If they had permission to, how many times? And from what IP address? So for those of you techie people out there, that's a pretty smart system. So again, security needs to be built in. We need to have that assurance, and that was a minimum requirement, so that will be an automated system.
Thank you for that. My name is Ana Banderas. I'm with the beloved community and as well as with Alliance for Black and Brown Advocacy, and this is Baby Shadeni. We want to know, what are the consequences for failure to comply with the cameras, whether that's turning them off or, you know, they just didn't work, or basically, you know, what happens when the camera is not on?
Thank you for your question. So I can speak to this on a couple of different levels. The policy is written such that, let me back up a little bit. The policy is not discretionary. The policy is very clear, and it instructs the officers when they shall turn that camera on. Shall is a must. In the world of law enforcement, if you don't do a shall, it can equal, or it does equal discipline, or some type of administrative response. So I'd like to assure you that the policy is very clear as to when the officer is expected to turn that camera on. In addition to that, we're requiring supervisors to do periodic audits of those camera files to ensure that officers are in compliance with the policy. Are they turning the camera on when they're supposed to? Are there files that are visible and not intentionally obstructed? We want to make sure that the officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing in compliance with policy, because then we can ensure the success and ultimately the protection of the officers through this program and our policy. I will also say that we are procuring a camera that will enable to record during the course of the officer's shift, which is 10 hours long. Nowadays, it's even longer. So we're going to make sure that that camera has enough power that it's continuing to stay on. If we need to bring extra batteries in the field to keep it running longer, then we're going to do that. The information that's stored in that camera is safe until it is uploaded into the cloud into a secure storage. Okay, so that information is not going anywhere. Now, I'll speak to what happens when an officer doesn't record when they're supposed to. Our body camera policy is being incorporated into our duty manual. Our duty manual is a binder of policies and procedures We call it the Bible, right? And those are the policies and procedures that explain and dictate how an officer does his or her duties, what they're supposed to do, what the expectations are of the officer. And like any duty manual section, if there is a policy violation, then an appropriate administrative investigation takes place subsequent to that if there's a violation there. As far as scales of discipline go, it's going to be treated like any other duty manual violation, and at some point in time, the chief officers in the department will need to set precedent. Again, if there's a failure to activate the camera. And the last thing I'll say is that upon initial deployment, we're training veteran officers on a new policy and a new piece of equipment. We fully expect that there will be some degree of a failure rate upon initial deployment. If it's because an officer is walking around and something happens suddenly, human performance under stress can play a factor. That said, the expectation is whatever failure rate we might start with, the expectation is also that that will be reduced. And there's a reasonable expectation that the officers will turn the cameras on. Now, there's other technology that's out there that they're developing where it turns on automatically. If you turn on your light bar, if you activate your taser, and those are things that in the future we'll look at. But for now, we're going to train the officers, and in short, hold them accountable to the policy.
Hi, I'm Tony Alexander from Emmanuel Baptist Church and the Beloved Community Team. My question is, why does the current policy give discretion for the chief of police to allow the video to be viewed by an officer before they make the report about a critical incident? We want officers to write the reports about what they did rather than review the video to justify what they did. Can you please explain why the current policy gives the chief the discretion to allow the officer to view the video before writing the report?
Thank you. I'll start by saying that we want the same thing. We want our officers, and we're talking specifically in what we call officer-involved incidents, very specific situation. That's an officer-involved shooting, an in-custody death, or a use of force likely to result in death. If we have one of those three situations, we do not want the officers viewing that video footage prior to providing an initial statement. This is our policy. We coordinated with our district attorney's office in development of the policy to include outreach with our policy working group. What we realize is that for an officer under a rapidly unfolding stressful situation, what that officer saw, felt, smelled, and feared, all those are his or her reality. We want an officer to explain and justify their actions based on their reality. When interviewing an officer, we would rather have an officer say, "I responded with deadly force because he had a gun." We don't want an officer to say, "I responded with deadly force because I thought he had a gun." So that is our policy, that they provide an initial statement. They will be given an opportunity to view that video footage with their representative, an attorney, after the initial statement, and then they're offered an opportunity to provide a follow-up statement. The portion of the policy that gives the chief the discretion to make an exception, it says chief or designee, is the exception to the rule. And I'd like to provide some background. I think one of the disadvantages in reading the policy, not having been in the room, not having been part of that initial framework, and understanding the intention behind the words and the context puts you at a real disadvantage. And that's why I'm here tonight, to try to provide that context, to explain it. Again, back to what I said, this is the rare exception and not the rule. And what I mean by that is, in the rare opportunity that we have an officer that's We don't want to have a situation where at some point in time, because there's zero allowance for that exception, that we have to violate our own policy. So this tiny exception, we intend to be used extremely judiciously. And I worked on the same radio channel the night, and this was just a case in point, one of the intentions behind this policy piece. I was on the channel the night Jeffrey Fontana was shot and killed on a car stop. God forbid, should we have something like that again, we want the officers to be able to pick up that video file. If this person is on the run and we're conducting a manhunt investigation and they're a threat to public safety or officers, we want to be able to access that footage. I will say that this came up on Tuesday in our policy working group. We're already talking about some potential solutions to provide clarity to this area. Now you have an understanding of the context, but we can do better. Some of the ideas we were thinking about, number one, we need to define what designee is. I recognize that that is too vague. The second thing that we're talking about is, because this is going to be used judiciously, rarely, that we have some type of mechanism in place to document, memorialize that exception to the rule, and that it's also subject to discovery and public records review. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do to demonstrate our intention behind that, and to assure you that that is not something that we intend to abuse. And you'll be seeing those, if and when we make those recommendations and get to the table with the union, we're going to talk through that, and I've already spoken with one of the union representatives regarding this point, and we expect some changes to that part of the policy.